19. Paul gazed after her, and the rolls of fat over his collar grew the color of beetroot. Despite the sweetness of his nature, he would not have minded doing to Margot what she suggested doing to him. He wondered who her companion might be and where Albinus was. He felt sure that the gentleman must be somewhere about, and that he thought the child might suddenly see him was intolerable. He was much relieved when the whistle blew and he could escape with Irma. They reached home. She looked tired, and in response to her mother's questions about the match, only nodded, smiling that faint, mysterious smile which was her most charming peculiarity. "It's amazing the way they dash about on the ice," said Paul. Elizabeth looked at him thoughtfully and then turned to her daughter. "Time for bed, she said. "Oh, no," entreated Irma sleepily. "Goodness, it's nearly midnight. You've never been up so late." "Tell me, Paul," said Elizabeth, and Irma was safely tucked up. "I've a feeling that something happened. I was so restless while you were away. Paul, tell me." "I've got nothing to tell," he said, growing very red in the face. "You didn't meet anyone?" she ventured. "You really didn't? What put such an idea into your head?" He muttered, thoroughly disconcerted by the almost telepathic sensibility which Elizabeth had developed since the separation from her husband. "I'm always fearing it," she whispered, slowly bending her head. The next morning Elizabeth was roused by the nurse, who came into her room with a thermometer in her hand. "Irma's ill, ma'am," she said briskly. "Her temperature is up to 101. 101, echoed Elizabeth, and suddenly thought, "That's why I was so uneasy yesterday." She sprang out of the bed and flew into the nursery. Irma was lying on her back, staring up at the ceiling with glistening eyes. "A fisherman and a boat," she said, pointing up at the ceiling, on which the rays of the bedside lamp cast a sort of pattern. It was quite early and snowing. "Does your throat hurt, my pet?" asked Elizabeth, still struggling with her dressing gown. She bent anxiously over the child's pointed little face. "My God, how hot her forehead is!" she exclaimed, stroking back the fine pale hair from Irma's brow. "And 1, 2, 3, 4 reeds," said Irma, softly, still looking up. "We'd better ring up the doctor," said Elizabeth. "Oh, there's no need for that, ma'am," said the nurse. "I'll give her some hot tea with lemon and a nice aspirin. Everybody's got the flu now." Elizabeth knocked at Paul's door. He was shaving, and with the lather still on his cheeks, he went to Irma's room. Paul often caught himself when he shaved, even with the safety razor, and now a bright red patch was spreading through the froth on his chin. "Strawberries and whipped cream," said Irma, softly, as he bent over. The doctor arrived toward evening, seated himself on the edge of Irma's bed, and with eyes fixed on the corner of the room began to count her pulse beats. Irma gazed at the white hair in the cavity of his large, complicated ear, and at the W-shaped vein on his pink temple. "Good," said the doctor, looking at her over the rim of his spectacles. Then he told Irma to sit up, and Elizabeth drew up the child's nightdress. Irma's body was very white and thin, with prominent shoulder blades. The doctor put his stethoscope to her back, breathing heavily, and told her to breathe too. "Good," he said again. Then he tapped her on different parts of the chest and plowed her stomach with icy-cold fingers. At last he stood up, patted her head, washed his hands, turned down his cuffs, and Elizabeth led him into the study, where he sat down comfortably, unscrewed his fountain pen, and wrote out his prescriptions. "Yes," he said, "that's a lot of influenza about. Yesterday a recital had to be cancelled because the singer and the accompanist were both down with it." Next morning Irma's temperature was considerably lower. Paul, on the other hand, was very seedy. He wheezed and kept blowing his nose, but flatly refused to take his bed, even went to his office as usual. The Fraulein, too, was sniffling. That evening, when Elizabeth drew out the warm glass tube from under her daughter's arm, she was delighted to see that the mercury had hardly risen above the red fever line. Irma blinked, the light dazzled her, and presently she turned her face to the wall. The room grew dark again. All was warm, cozy, and a little absurd. Soon Irma fell asleep as she woke up in the middle of the night from a vaguely unpleasant dream. She was thirsty, and she felt for the sticky glass of lemonade which was on the bed table, emptied it, and carefully set it back again, smacking her lips gently. The room seemed to her darker than usual. In the next room the nurse was snoring violently, almost ecstatically. Irma listened to her, and then she began to wait for the friendly rumble of the electric train, which emerged from underground very near the house, but it did not come. Perhaps it was too late, and the trains had stopped running. Irma lay with wide-open eyes. Suddenly she heard from the street a familiar whistle on 4 notes. That was exactly how her father whistled when he used to come back home, just to let them know that he would be with them in a moment, and that supper could be served. Irma knew perfectly well that it was not he, but a man who had, for the last fortnight, been visiting the lady on the 4th floor. The porter's little daughter had told her as much. and had put out her tongue when Irma observed very reasonably that it was stupid to come so late. She knew, too, that she must not talk about her father, who was living with his little friend. This Irma had gathered from the conversation of two ladies who were walking downstairs in front of her. The whistle beneath the window was repeated. Irma thought, who knows, perhaps it is father after all, and no one will let him in. Perhaps they told me on purpose that it was a strange man. She threw off the bedclothes and went on tippy-toe to the window. As she did so, she knocked against the chair something soft. Her elephant fell with a thud and a squeak, but Fraulein snored on unconcernedly. She opened the window, and a delicious, ice-cold gust of air entered the room. In the street, in darkness, somebody was standing, gazing up at the house. She looked down at him for quite a long time, but to her great disappointment it was not her father. The man stood and stood. Then he turned round and walked away slowly. Irma felt sorry for him. She was so numb with cold that she could scarcely shut the window, and could not get warm again when she went back to her bed. At length she fell asleep and dreamed that she was playing hockey with her father. He laughed, slipped, and fell on his bottom, losing his top hat, and she bumped down too. The ice was awful, but she could not get up, and her hockey stick walked away like a loping caterpillar. The next morning her temperature was up to 104, her face livid, and she complained of a pain in her side. The doctor was summoned immediately. The patient's pulse was 120. The chest over the seat of the pain was dull on percussion, and the stethoscope revealed fine crepitation. He ordered blistering, phenacetin, and a soothing medicine. Elizabeth felt suddenly that she would go out of her mind, that after all that had happened, fate simply had not the right to torture her like this. With a great effort she had pulled herself together as she said goodbye to the doctor. Before leaving, he had a look at the nurse, who was in high fever, but in the case of this vigorous woman there was no cause for alarm. Paul accompanied him to the hall, and asked in a hoarse voice, he was trying to whisper through this cold, whether there was any danger. I'll look in again today, answered the doctor slowly. Always the same, thought old Lampert, as he went downstairs. Always the same questions, the same imploring glances. He consulted his notebook and slid from behind the steering wheel of his car, slamming the door as he did so. 5 minutes later he was entering another house. Albinus received him in the silk-braided warm jacket which he put on when at work in his study. She hasn't been feeling well since yesterday, he said worriedly. She complains that she aches all over. Temperature? Asked Lampert, wondering whether he should tell this anxious lover that his daughter had pneumonia. No, that's just it. She doesn't seem to have a temperature, said Albinus in a tone of alarm, and I was told that influenza without feverish symptoms is particularly dangerous. Why should I tell him, thought Lampert. He deserted his family without a qualm. They'll tell him themselves if they want to. Why should I interfere? Well, said Lampert with a sigh, let's have a look at our charming invalid. Margot was lying on the sofa, cross and flushed, enveloped in a silk wrapper with a great deal of lace. Beside her sat Rex with his legs crossed, stretching her lovely head on the bottom of a cigarette-box. A lovely creature, unquestionably, thought Lampert, but there is something snake-like about her. Rex retired into the next room, whistling. Albinus hovered close at hand. Lampert proceeded to examine the patient. A slight chill, that was all. You'd better stay indoors for 2 or 3 days, said Lampert. How's the film going, by the way? Finished? Yes, thank God, answered Margot, drawing her wrap around her languidly. And next month there's to be a private view of it. I must be well by that time, whatever happens. And moreover, reflected Lampert irreverently, this little slut is going to be the ruin of him. When the doctor had gone, Rex returned to Margot's side and went on sketching idly, whistling through his teeth all the time. For some moments Albinus stood near him, his head cocked, following the rhythmic movements of that bony white hand. Then he went off to his study to finish an article about the much-discussed exhibition. Rather nice being the friend of the house, said Rex, with a snort of laughter. Margot looked at him and said angrily, Yes, I do love you, ugly, but there's nothing doing. You know that yourself. He twisted the cigarette-box round and then sent it spinning onto the table. Listen, my dear, you've got to come to me some day. That's plain. My visits here are very exhilarating, of course, and all that, but I'm getting sick of this kind of fun. In the first place, please don't shout. You won't be satisfied until we've done something idiotically rash. At the least provocation, at the least suspicion, he'll kill me or turn me out of the house, and we shall neither of us, have a penny. Kill you? Chuckled Rex. That's rich. Do you please wait a little. Don't you understand? Once he has married me, I shall be less nervous and freer to act as I choose. A wife can't be rid of so easily. Besides, there's the film. I've sorts of plans. The film, laughed Rex again. Yes, you'll see, I'm certain it's going to be a great hit. We must wait. I'm just as impatient as you are, my love. He seated himself on the edge of her sofa and laid his arm round her shoulder. No, no, she said, shivering and half closing her eyes already. Just one tiny little kiss. Very tiny, she said in a smothered voice. He bent over her, but suddenly a door clicked in the distance, and they heard Albinus approaching. Carpet, floor again. Rex was about to raise himself, but at the same moment he noticed that a button of his coat was caught in the lace on Margot's shoulder. Margot tried to disentangle it swiftly. Rex tugged, but the lace refused to give way. Margot grunted, and in dismay she pulled at the knot with her sharp, shiny nails. At that moment Albinus swept into the room. "No, I'm not embracing Fraulein Peters," said Rex coolly. "I was only making her comfortable, and got entangled, you see." Margot was still wearing the lace without raising her lashes. The situation was partial in the extreme, and Rex was enjoying it hugely. Albinus silently drew out a fat penknife with a dozen blades and opened what turned out to be a small file. He tried again and broke his nail. The burlesque was developing nicely. "For heaven's sake, don't stab her," said Rex ecstatically. "Hands off," said Albinus, but Margot screamed, "Don't you dare cut the lace! Cut off the button!" "Stop! It's my button!" yelled Rex. For a moment it looked as if both men were falling on top of her. Rex gave a final tug, something snapped, and he was free. "Come to my study," said Albinus to him darkly. "Now let's be smart," thought Rex, and he recalled a dodge which had helped him once before to fool a rival. "Please sit down," said Albinus with a heavy frown. "What I want to tell you is rather important. It's about the White Raven exhibition. I was wondering whether you'd care to help me. You see, I'm finishing a rather involved and, well, subtle article, and several exhibitors are receiving rather rough treatment at my hands." "Oh-ho," thought Rex, "so that's why you looked so lugubrious. Gloom of the learned mind? Throes of inspiration? Gorgeous." "Now what I'd like you to do," Albinus went on, "is to illustrate my article by throwing in little caricatures, stressing the little things I criticize, lampooning both color and line as you once did with Barcelo." "I'm your man," said Rex, "but I too have a little request. You know what I mean, expecting various fees and being rather short of the ready money. Could you make me an advance? Just a trifle, 500 marks, shall we say?" "Why, of course, more if you like. Anyway, you must fix the fee for the drawings." "Is this a catalogue?" asked Rex. "May I have a look at it? Girls, girls, girls," he continued with marked disgust as he considered the reproductions. "Square girls, slanting girls, girls with elephantitis." "And why, pray, Albinus, slyly, do girls bore you so?" Rex explained quite frankly. "Well, that's only a matter of taste, I suppose," said Albinus, who prided himself on his broad-mindedness. "Of course I don't condemn you. It's a thing widely spread, I believe, among men of artistic temperament. In a shopkeeper it would repel me, but in a painter it's quite different, quite likable, in fact, and romantic. Romance coming from Rome, nevertheless." He added, "I can assure you that you lose a great deal. No, thank you. A woman for me is only a harmless mammal, a jolly companion sometimes." Albinus laughed. "Well, as you are so outspoken about it, let me in my turn confess something to you. That actress woman, Karenina, said as soon as she saw you that she was sure you were indifferent to the gentler sex." "Oh, did she?" thought Rex. 20. A few days passed. Margot still had a cough, and as she was apt to get very nervous about herself, she stayed at home and for lack of something to do, reading not being her forte, she amused herself in the way Rex had recommended. Lying comfortably in bright chaos of cushions, she consulted the telephone book and rang up unknown individuals, shops, and business firms. She ordered prams, lilies, radio sets to be sent to addresses selected at random. She made fools of worthy citizens and advised their wives to be less credulous. She rang up the same number 10 times in succession, thereby reducing Messrs. Trom, Baum, Kaspar to desperation. She received wonderful declarations of love and still more wonderful curses. Albinus came in and stood watching her with a fond smile while she ordered a coffin for a Frau Kirchhoff. Her kimono was undone, the little feet were kicking in malicious delight, the long eyes moved to and fro, and she listened. Albinus was filled with passionate tenderness, and he quietly stood a little way off, afraid to approach, afraid of spoiling her pleasure. Now she was telling Professor Grimm the story of her life and imploring him to meet her at midnight, while on the other end of the wire the professor was painfully and ponderously debating with himself whether this invitation was a hoax or the result of his fame as an ichthyologist. In view of Margot's telephonic frolics, it was not surprising that Paul had been vainly trying to get through to Albinus for the last half hour. He kept ringing up and every time was met by the same remorseless buzz. At last he rose, felt a rush of giddiness, and heavily sat down again. He had not slept for 2 nights. He was sick and in a storm of grief, but all the same he had to do it, and it was going to be done. The persistent buzz seemed to mean that fate was determined to thwart his intention, but Paul was stubborn. If he could not do it this way, he would try another. He tiptoed into the nursery, which was dark and, despite the presence of several persons, very quiet. He saw the back of his sister's head, the comb behind and the woolen shawl round her shoulders, and suddenly he turned round and resolutely stepped out into the hall, dragged on his overcoat, groaning and choking down his sobs, and set off to fetch Albinus. "Wait," he said to the taxi driver as he alighted on the pavement before the familiar house. He was already pushing the entrance door when Rex hurried up from behind. Both men entered at the same moment. They looked at one another, and there was a great outburst of cheering as the puck was shot into the Swedish goal. "Are you on your way to see Herr Albinus?" asked Paul grimly. Rex smiled and nodded his head. "Then let me tell you that he won't be receiving any visitors just now. I'm his wife's brother and have some very bad news for him. Would you like to entrust me with your message?" inquired Rex blandly. Paul suffered from shortness of breath. He halted on the first landing. With lowered head, like a bull, he gazed at Rex, who looked back curiously and expectantly at his puffed-up, tear-stained face. "I advise you to postpone your visit," said Paul, breathing heavily. "My brother-in-law's little girl is dying." He continued his way up the stairs, and Rex followed him quietly. Hearing the impertinent steps behind him, Paul felt the blood rush to his head, but was afraid of being delayed by his asthma, and so controlled himself. When they reached the door of the flat, he again turned to Rex and said, "I don't know who and what you are, but I'm at a loss to understand your persistence." "Oh, my name is Axel Rex, and I'm quite at home here," replied Rex affably, as he stretched out a long white finger and pressed the electric bell. "Shall I hit him?" thought Paul, "and then what does it matter now? The main thing is to get it over quickly." A short gray-haired footman, the English lord had been sacked. "Let them in." "Tell your master," said Rex with a sigh, "that this gentleman here would like—" "Shut up, you," said Paul, and standing in the middle of the hall, he shouted as loudly as he could, "Albert!" and again Albert. When Albinus saw the distorted face of his brother-in-law, he made an awkward little rush toward him, skidded, and came to a dead stop. "Irma is dangerously ill," said Paul, thumping with his stick on the floor. "You'd better come at once." A brief silence ensued. Rex surveyed them both greedily. Suddenly Margot's shrill voice rang out from the drawing-room. "Albert, I've got to speak to you." "Just coming," stammered Albinus, and he hurried into the drawing-room. Margot was standing with her arms crossed on her breast. "My little girl is dangerously ill," said Albinus. "I'm going to see her at once." "They are lying to you," Margot cried angrily. "It's a trap to entice you back. Margot, for God's sake." She seized his hand. "And what if I come with you?" "Margot, enough. You must understand. Where's my lighter? Where's my lighter? Where's my lighter? He's waiting for me. They're fooling you. I won't let you go." "They're waiting for me," Albinus stammered with wide-open eyes. "If you dare—" Paul was standing in the hall, in the same position, prodding the floor with a stick. Rex produced a tiny enamel box. From the drawing-room came the blare of excited voices. Rex offered Paul some cough drops. Paul pushed back with his elbow, without looking, and spilled the sweets. Rex laughed. Again that outburst of voices. "Ghastly," murmured Paul, and walked out, with his cheeks quivering. He hurried downstairs. "Well?" asked Fraulein in a whisper when he got back. "No, he's not coming," answered Paul. He covered his eyes with his hand for a moment, cleared his throat, and as before tiptoed into the nursery. Nothing had changed there. Softly, rhythmically, Irma was tossing her head to and fro on the pillow. Her half-opened eyes were dim. Every now and then a hiccup shook her. Elizabeth smoothed her bedclothes, the mechanical gesture devoid of sense. A spoon fell off the table, and its delicate jingle lingered for a long time in the ears of those in the room. The hospital nurse counted the pulse beats, blinked, and cautiously, as though afraid of hurting it, put back the little hand on the coverlet. "She's thirsty, perhaps?" whispered Elizabeth. The nurse shook her head. Someone in the room coughed very softly. Irma tossed about, then raised one slight knee under the bedclothes, and presently stretched it out again very slowly. A door creaked. Fraulein came in and said something in Paul's ear. Paul nodded, and she went out. Presently the door creaked again, but Elizabeth did not turn her head. The man who had entered halted a couple of feet from the bed. He could only dimly discern his wife's fair hair and shawl, but with agonizing distinctness he saw Irma's face, her small black nostrils, the yellowish gloss of her rounded forehead. He stood like this for a long time, then he opened his mouth very wide, and somebody, a distant cousin of his, seized him under the armpits from behind. He found himself sitting in Paul's study. On the divan in the corner, two ladies, whose names he could not remember, were seated, talking in low tones. He had a queer feeling that if he remembered, everything would be all right again. Huddled in an armchair, Irma Fraulein was sobbing. A dignified old gentleman with a great bald brow was standing at the window smoking, and every now and then lifting himself from heel to toe. On the table a glass bowl with oranges gleamed. "Why didn't they send for me before?" muttered Albinus, raising his eyebrows. Without addressing anybody in particular, he frowned, shook his head, and cracked his finger-joints. Silence. The clock on the mantelpiece ticked. Lampert came in from the nursery. "Well?" asked Albinus hoarsely. Lampert turned to the dignified old gentleman, who shrugged his shoulders slightly and followed him to the sick room. A long time elapsed. The windows were quite dark. Nobody had troubled to draw the curtains. Albinus took an orange and began peeling it slowly. Outside snow was falling, and only muffled noises rose from the street. From time to time a tinkling sound came from the central heating apparatus. Down in the street someone whispered 4 notes, Siegfried, and then all was silent again. Albinus slowly ate the orange. It was very sour. Suddenly Paul came into the room, and without looking at anyone, uttered a single short word. In the nursery, Albinus saw his wife's back, as she bent, motionless and intent, over the bed, still holding, it seemed, a ghostly glass in her hand. The hospital nurse put her arm around her shoulders and led her into dimness. Albinus walked up to the bed. For a moment he had a vague glimpse of a little dead face, and of a short pale lip with bared front teeth, and one little milk tooth was missing. Then all became misty before his eyes. He turned round, and very carefully, trying not to jostle against anybody or anything, went out. The front door below was locked. But as he stood there, a painted lady in a Spanish shawl came down, opened it, and let in a snow-covered man. Albinus looked at his watch. It was past midnight. Had he really been there 5 hours? He walked along the white, soft, crunching pavement, and still could not quite believe what had happened. In his mind's eye he had pictured Irma with surprising white vividness, scrambling onto Paul's knees or patting a light ball against the wall with her hands. But the taxis hooted as if nothing had happened. The snow glittered Christmas-like under the lamps. The sky was black, and only in the distance, beyond the dark mass of the roofs, in the direction of the Gedächtniskirche, where the great picture-placed palaces were, did the blackness melt to a warm brownish-bluish. All at once he remembered the names of the 2 ladies in the divan, Blanche and Rosa von Nacht. At length he reached home. Margot was lying supine, smoking lustily. Albinus was vaguely aware of having quarreled with her hideously, but that did not matter now. She followed his movements in silence, as he quietly walked up and down the room and wiped his face, which was wet from the snow. All she felt now was delicious content. Rex had left a short time before, well contented too. Perhaps for the first time in the course of the year he had spent with Margot, Albinus was perfectly conscious of the thin, slimy layer of turpitude which had settled on his life. Now, with a dazzling distinctness, fate seemed to be urging him to come to his senses. He heard her thunderous summons. He realized what a rare opportunity was being offered him to raise his life to its former level, and he knew with the lucidity of grief that if he returned to his wife now, the reconciliation which, under ordinary circumstances, would have been impossible would come about almost of itself. Certain recollections of that night gave him no peace. He remembered how Paul had suddenly glanced at him with moist, imploring look. And then, turning away, had squeezed his arm slightly. He remembered how in the mirror he had had a fleeting glimpse of his wife's eyes, in which there had been a heart-rending expression, pitiful, hunted, but still akin to a smile. He pondered over all this with deep emotion. Yes, if he were to go to his little girl's funeral, he would stay with his wife forever. He rang up Paul, and the maid told him the place and the hour of the burial. Next morning he rose while Margot was still asleep, and ordered the servant to get him his black coat and top hat. After he had hastily swallowed some coffee, he went to Irma's former nursery, where a long table with a green net across it now stood. Listlessly he took up a small celluloid ball and let it bounce, but instead of thinking of his child, he saw another figure, a graceful, lively, wanton girl, laughing, leaning over the table, one heel raised, as she thrust out her ping-pong bat. It was time to start. In a few minutes he would be holding Elizabeth under the elbow in front of an open grave. He threw the little ball on the table and went quickly to the bedroom in order to see Margot asleep for the last time. And as she stood by the bed and feasted his eyes on that childish face with the soft pink lips and flushed cheeks, Albinus remembered their first night together, and thought with horror of his future by the side of his pale, faded wife. This future seemed to him like one of those long, dim, dusty passages where one finds a nailed-up box or an empty perambulator. With an effort, he turned his eyes away from the sleeping girl, nervously bit his thumbnail, and walked to the window. It was thawing. Bright motor cars were splashing their way through the puddles. At the corner a ragged rapscallion was selling violets. An adventurous Alsatian was insistently following a tiny Pekingese which snarled, turned, and slithered at the end of its leash. A great, brilliant slice of the rapid blue sky was mirrored in a glass pane which a bare-armed servant girl was washing vigorously. "Why are you up so early? Where are you going?" asked Margot in a drawling voice, broken by a yawn. "Nowhere," he said without turning around. 22. "Don't be so depressed, Woggy," she said to him a fortnight later. "I know that it's all very sad, but they've grown to be almost strangers to you. You feel that yourself, don't you? And of course they turned the little girl against you. Believe me, I do quite enter into your feelings, although if I could have a child, I'd rather have a boy." "You're a child yourself," said Albinus, stroking her hair. "Today of all days we must be in good spirits," continued Margot. "Today of all days. It's the beginning of my career. I'll be famous. Why, yes, I had forgotten. When is it? Really today?" Rex sauntered in. Of late he had been with them every day, and Albinus had poured out his heart to him on several occasions, and told him all that he could not say to Margot. Rex listened so kindly, made such sensible comments, and was so sympathetic that the shortness of their acquaintance seemed to Albinus a mere accident, in no way connected with the inner, spiritual time during which their friendship had developed and matured. "One can't build up one's life on the quicksands of misfortune," Rex had said to him. "That is a sin against life." "I once had a friend who was a sculptor, and whose unerring appreciation of form was almost uncanny. Then all of a sudden, out of pity, he married an ugly elderly hunchback. I don't know exactly what happened, but one day soon after their marriage, they packed 2 little suitcases, one for each, and went on foot to the nearest lunatic asylum. In my opinion, an artist must let himself be guided solely by his sense of beauty. That will never deceive him." "Death," he had said on another occasion, "seems to be merely a bad habit, which nature is at present powerless to overcome. I once had a dear friend, a beautiful boy full of life, with the face of an angel and the muscles of a panther. He cut himself while opening a tin of preserved peaches, you know, the large, soft, slippery kind that flap in the mouth and slither down. He died a few days later of blood poisoning. Fatuous, isn't it? And yet it is strange but true, that viewed as a work of art, the shape of his life would not have been so perfect had he been left to grow old. Death often is the point of life's joke." On such occasions Rex could talk endlessly, indefatigably, inventing stories about non-existent friends and propounding reflections not too profound for the mind of his listener, and the couched in a sham brilliant form. His culture was patchy, but his mind shrewd and penetrating, and his itch to make fools of his fellow men amounted almost to genius. Perhaps the only real thing about him was his innate conviction that everything that had ever been created in the domain of art, science, or sentiment was only a more or less clever trick. No matter how important the subject under discussion, he could always find something witty or trite to say about it, supplying exactly what his listener's mind or mood demanded, though at the same time he could be impossibly rude and overbearing when his interlocutor annoyed him. Even when he was talking quite seriously about a book or a picture, Rex had a pleasant feeling that he was partner in a conspiracy, the partner of some ingenious quack, namely the author of the book or the painter of the picture. He watched with interest the sufferings of Albinus, and his opinion of with simple passions and a too solid knowledge of painting, who thought, poor man, that he had touched the very depths of human distress, whereas Rex reflected with a sense of pleasant anticipation that, far from being the limit, it was merely the first item of the program of a roaring comedy at which he, Rex, had been reserved a place in the stage manager's private box. The stage manager of this performance was neither God nor the devil. The former was far too gray, venerable, and old-fashioned, and the latter, surfeited with other people's sins, was a bore to himself and to others, as dull as rain. In fact, rain at dawn in the prison court, where some poor imbecile, yawning nervously, is being quietly put to death for the murder of his grandmother. The stage manager whom Rex had in view was an elusive, double, triple, self-reflecting magic Proteus of a phantom, the shadow of many-colored glass balls, flying in a curve, the ghost of a juggler on shimmering curtain. This, at any rate, was what Rex surmised in his rare moments of philosophic meditation. He took life lightly, and the only human feeling that he ever experienced was his keen liking for Margot, which he endeavored to explain to himself by her physical characteristics, by something in the odor of her skin, the epithelium of her lips, the temperature of her body. But this was not quite the true explanation. Their mutual passion was based on a profound affinity of souls through Margot was a vulgar little Berlin girl, and he a cosmopolitan artist. When Rex called on that day of all days, he managed to tell her, as he was helping her on with her coat, that he had rented a room where they could meet undisturbed. She flung him an angry glance, for Albinus was patting his pockets only 10 paces away. Rex chuckled and added, hardly lowering his voice, that he would expect her there every day at a given hour. "I'm inviting Margot to a rendezvous, but she won't come," he brightly said to Albinus as they were walking downstairs. "Let her just try," smiled Albinus, pinching Margot's cheek affectionately. "Now we shall see what sort of an actress you are," he added, drawing on his gloves. "Tomorrow at 5, Margot, eh?" said Rex. "Tomorrow the child is going to choose herself a car," said Albinus, "so she can't come to you. She'll have plenty of time in the morning for choosing. Does 5 suit you, Margot? Or shall we say 6 and clinch it?" Margot suddenly lost her temper. "Idiotic joke," she said through her teeth. The two men laughed and exchanged amused glances. The hall porter, who was talking to the postman outside, gazed at them curiously as they passed. "It's hardly believable," said he, when they were out of hearing, that heir's little daughter died a couple of weeks ago." "And who's the other heir?" said the postman. "Don't ask me. An additional lover, I suppose. To tell the truth, I'm ashamed that the other tenants should see it all. And yet he's a rich, generous gentleman. What I always say is, if he's got to have a mistress, he might have chosen a larger and plumper one." "Love is blind," remarked the postman thoughtfully. "23. In the little hall where the film was to be viewed by a score of actors and guests, Margot felt a blissful shudder run down her back. Not far away she noticed the film's manager, in whose office she had once been made to feel so ridiculous. He walked up to Albinus, and Albinus introduced him to Margot. He had a large yellow sty on his right eyelid. Margot was so vexed that he did not recognize her. "We had a talk a couple of years ago," she said slyly. "Quite right," he replied with a polite smile. "I remember you perfectly." He did not. As soon as the lights were out, Rex, who was seated between Margot and Albinus, fumbled for her hand and clasped it. In front of them, Doriana Karenina was sitting with her sumptuous fur coat, although the room was hot, between the producer and the film man with the sty, to whom she was trying to be very nice. The title and the names unrolled with a diffident quiver. The apparatus hummed softly and monotonously, rather like a distant vacuum cleaner. There was no music. Margot appeared on the screen almost at once. She was reading a book, then she slapped it down and lurched to the window. Her fiancé was riding past. Margot was so horrified that she wrenched her hand away from Rex. Who on earth was that ghastly creature, awkward and ugly, with swollen, strangely altered leech-black mouth, misplaced brows, and unexpected creases in her dresses? The girl on the screen stared wildly in front of her, and then broke in two with her stomach on the window-sill, and her buttocks to the spectators. Margot thrust away Rex's groping hand. She wanted to bite someone or throw herself on the floor and kick. That monster on the screen had nothing in common with her. She was awful, awful. She was in fact like her mother, the porter's wife, in her wedding photograph. Perhaps it'll be better later on, she thought miserably. Albinus bent over to her, almost embracing Rex as he did so, and whispered tenderly, "Sweet, marvelous, I had no idea." He really was enchanted. Somehow he recalled the little Argus cinema, where they had first met, and it touched him that Margot should act so atrociously, and yet with such a delightful childish zeal, like a schoolgirl reciting a birthday poem. Rex was delighted too. He had never doubted that Margot would be a failure on the screen, and he knew that she would revenge herself on Albinus for his failure. Tomorrow, by way of reaction, she would come, at 5 punctually. It was all very pleasant. His hand went groping once more, and suddenly she gave him a violent pinch. After short absence, Margot reappeared. She stole furtively along house fronts, patting the walls and looking over her shoulder, although queerly enough, causing not the slightest surprise to the passers-by, and then crept into a cafe where a good soul had told her that she might find her lover in the company of a vamp, Doriana Karenina. She crept in, and her back looked fat and clumsy. I shall yell in a moment, thought Margot. Fortunately, there came a timely fade-in, and there was disclosed a little table in the cafe, a bottle and an ice pail, and a hero offering Doriana a cigarette, then lighting it for her, which gesture, in every producer's mind, is the symbol of newborn intimacy. Doriana threw back her head, breathed out the smoke, and smiled with the one corner of her mouth. Someone in the hall began to clap. Others joined in. Then Margot appeared. The applause was hushed. Margot opened her mouth, as in real life she had never opened it, and then with drooping head and dangling arms came out into the street again. Doriana, the real Doriana, who was sitting in front of them, turned round and her eyes beamed amiably in the semi-darkness. "Bravo, little girl," she said in her husky voice, and Margot would have liked to scratch her face. Now she so dreaded her every reappearance on the screen that she felt quite faint and was no longer capable of pushing and pinching Rex's persistent hand. She felt her hot breath in his ear as she moaned gently, "Please stop or I'll change my seat." He patted her knee and withdrew his hand. The forsaken sweetheart returned her, and her every movement was agony to Margot. She felt like a soul in hell, to whom the demons are displaying the unsuspected lining of this earthly transgressions, those stiff, clumsy, angular gestures. In her bloated face she somehow recognized her mother's expression, and the latter was trying to be polite to an influential tenant. "A most successful scene," whispered Albinus, bending over to her again. Rex was getting bored with sitting in the dark, watching a bad film and having a large man lean over him. He closed his eyes and saw the little colored caricatures he had been doing lately for Albinus, and meditated over the fascinating, though quite simple problem of how to suck some more cash out of him. The drama was drawing to a close. The hero, deserted by the vamp, made his way to a chemist's, and in a good cinematic downpour, to buy himself some poison, but remembered his old mother and went back to this native farm hand instead. There, among hens and pigs, his original sweetheart was playing with her illegitimate baby. It would not remain illegitimate long now, judging by the way he peered over the fence. This was Margot's best scene, but as the infant smuggled up to her, she suddenly stroked down from her dress the back of her hand, quite unintentionally, as if she were wiping her hand, and the infant gazed at her askance. A laugh rippled through the hall. Margot could stand it no longer and began to cry softly. As soon as the lights went up, she left her seat and walked rapidly toward the exit. With a worried look of apprehension, Albinus hurried after her. Rex got up and stretched himself. Doriana touched his arm. Beside her stood the man with the sty, yawning. "A failure," said Doriana, winking. "Poor little lass. And you are satisfied with your performance?" asked Rex curiously. Doriana laughed. "I'll tell you a secret. A true actress cannot be satisfied. Nor can the public, sometimes," said Rex calmly. "By the way, do tell me, my dear, how did you come to hit on your stage name? It sort of disturbs me." "Oh, that's a long story," she answered wistfully. "If you come to tea with me one day, I shall perhaps tell you more about it. The boy who suggested this name committed suicide." "Ah, and no wonder. But what I wanted to know, tell me, have you read Tolstoy?" "Tolstoy?" queried Doriana Karenina. "No, I'm afraid not. Why?" "24. There were stormy scenes at home, sobs, moans, hysterics. She flung herself on the sofa, the bed, the floor. Her eyes sparkled brilliantly and wrathfully. One of her stockings had slipped down. The world was swamped in tears. Albinus, as he tried to console her, unconsciously used the very words with which he had once comforted Irma when he kissed a bruise, words which now, after Irma's death, were vacant. At first Margot vented her whole wrath upon him. Then she abused Doriana in terrible language, after which she assailed the producer. On the way she had a fling with Grossman, the old man with the sty, though he had nothing at all to do with the matter. "All right," said Albinus at last, "I'll do everything I possibly can for you, but I really don't think it was a failure. On the contrary, in several of the scenes you acted very well. In that first one, for instance, you know, when you—" "Hold your tongue," shrieked Margot, flinging an orange at him. "But do listen to me, my pet. I'm prepared to do anything to make my darling happy. Now let's take a fresh handkerchief and dry up your tears for good. I'll tell you what I'll do. The film belongs to me. I'm paid for the rubbish. I mean the rubbish Schwartz has made of it. I shall refuse to allow it to be shown anywhere, and I'll keep it as a souvenir for myself." "No, burn it," sobbed Margot. "Very well, I'll burn it. Doriana won't be overpleased with that, I can assure you. Now are we satisfied?" She still went on sobbing, but more quietly. Come, don't cry any more, darling. Tomorrow you shall go and choose yourself something. Shall I tell you what? A big thing on 4 wheels? Have you forgotten that? Now won't that be fun? Then you'll show it to me. And perhaps he smiled and raised his eyebrows as he slyly drawled the words, "Perhaps I'll buy it. We'll drive miles and miles away. You shall see the spring in the south, eh, Margot? But that's not the point," she said sulkily. "The point is that you should be happy, and happy you'll be. Where's that hanky? We'll come back in the autumn. You shall take some more courses in film acting, and I'll find a really clever producer for you, Grossman, for instance." "No, not him," muttered Margot with a shudder. "All right, another one of them. And now wipe away your tears like a good girl, and we'll go out to supper. Please, little one." "I'll never be happy until you get a divorce," she said, sighing deeply, "and I'm afraid you'll leave me, now that you've seen in me that disgusting film. Oh, another man in your place would have slapped their faces for making me look so monstrous. No, you shan't kiss me. Tell me, have you done anything about the divorce, or has the whole thing been dropped?" "Well, no, you see it's like this," stammered Albinus. "Oh, Margot, we have just, that is to say, she in particular, in a word, this bereavement makes it rather difficult for me." "What's that you say?" asked Margot, rising to her feet. "Does she still not know that you want her to divorce you?" "No, I didn't mean that," said Albinus lamely. "Of course she feels, that is to say, she knows, or better say," Margot slowly drew herself up higher and higher like a snake when it uncoils. "To tell the truth, she won't divorce me," said Albinus at last, for the first time in his life telling a lie about Elizabeth. "Oh, is that so?" asked Margot as she advanced on him. "She's going to strike me," thought Albinus wearily. Margot came right up to him and slowly placed her arms around his neck. "I can't go on being your only mistress," she said, pressing her cheek against his tie. "I can't. Do something about it. Say to yourself tomorrow, 'I'll do it for my baby.' There are lawyers. It can be arranged." "I promise you I'll do it this autumn," he said. She sighed softly, walked to the mirror, and languidly gazed at her own reflection. "Divorce?" thought Albinus. No, that's out of the question." "25. Rex had converted the room which he had rented for his meetings with Margot into a studio, and whenever Margot came, she found him at work. He generally whistled tunefully while he drew. Margot gazed at his chalk-white cheeks, his thick crimson lips pursed into a circle as he whistled, and she felt that this man meant everything to her. He wore a silk shirt with an open collar and a pair of old flannel trousers. He was performing miracles with Indian ink. They met like this almost every afternoon, and Margot kept putting off the day of departure, although the car was bought and it was already spring. "May I offer a suggestion?" said Rex to Albinus one day. "Why do you need to take a chauffeur to your trip?" "I'm rather good at driving cars, you know." "That's very kind of you," answered Albinus, rather hesitatingly, "but, well, I'm afraid to take you away from your work. We want to go rather a long way." "Oh, don't bother about me. I meant to take a holiday in any case. Glorious sun, quaint old customs, golf links, trips included." "In that case we shall be delighted," said Albinus, wondering anxiously what Margot would think of it, but Margot, after a little hesitation, agreed to the suggestion. "All right, let him come," she said. "I really quite like him, but he's got into the habit of confiding his love affairs to me, and he sighs over them as if they were the normal thing. It gets a little tedious." It was the day before their departure. On her way home from the shops, Margot ran in to see Rex. The box of paints, the pencils, the dusty ray of sunlight slanting across the room, all this reminded her of the time when she posed in the nude. "Why are you in such a hurry?" said Rex lazily, as she was making up her lips. "Today's the last time. I don't know how we're going to manage on the journey." "We are both smart enough," she answered with a throaty laugh. She ran into the street and looked for a taxi. But the sun-lit thoroughfare was empty. She came to a square, and as she always did when she was returning home from Rex's room, she thought, "Shall I turn to the right, then cross the garden, and then to the right again?" There lay the street where she had lived as a child. The past was safe in its cage. Why not have a look? The street had not changed. There was the baker's at the corner, there was the butcher's, with the gilt ox head on the signboard, and outside the shop a bulldog was tied up. It belonged to the Major's window from number 15, but the stationery shop had turned into a hairdresser's. There was the same old newspaper woman at her stand. There was the beer house with Otto used to patronize, and over there was the house in which she had been born. It was undergoing repairs, judging by the scaffolding. She did not care to go any nearer. As she was walking back, a familiar voice called to her. It was Caspar, her brother's companion. He was pushing a bicycle with a violet frame and a basket in front of the handlebar. "Hello, Margot," he said, smiling a little shyly, as he walked along the pavement by her side. The last time she had seen him, he had been very surly. But that had been in a group, an organization, almost a gang. Now that he was alone, he was simply an old friend. "Well, how are you getting on, Margot?" "Splendidly," she laughed. "And what about you?" "Oh, just rubbing along. Did you know that your people have moved? They're living in North Berlin now. You should pay them a visit one day, Margot. Your father won't hold out much longer. And where's my dear brother?" she asked. "Oh, he's gone away. I fancy he's working at Bielefeld. You know yourself how much they loved me at home," she said, frowning at her feet, as she walked on the very edge of the curb. "And did they bother about me afterward? Did they care what became of me?" Caspar coughed and said, "All the same, they're your people, Margot. Your mother got the sack here, and she doesn't like the new place." "And what do people say about me there?" she asked, looking up at him. "Oh, a lot of rubbish, backbiting, the usual thing. I've always said that a girl has the right to do as she likes with her own life. And are you getting on well with your friend?" "Oh, yes, more or less. He's going to marry me soon." "Fine," said Caspar. "I'm very glad for you, for your sake. Only it's a pity that it's impossible to have any fun with you, like in the old days. A great pity. Haven't you got a sweetheart?" she asked, smiling. "No, not at the moment. Life's very hard sometimes, Margot. I'm working in a confectioner's. I should like to have a confectioner's shop of my own some day." "Yes, life can be hard," said Margot pensively, and after a little pause she called a taxi. "Perhaps one day we might," Caspar began, but no, they would never again bathe in that lake. "She's going to the dogs," he thought, as he watched her seat herself in the cab. "Ought to marry some good simple man. I wouldn't take her, though. A fellow would never know where he was." He swung himself onto the bicycle and rode rapidly after the taxi to the next street corner. Margot waved to him as he swerved gracefully into a side street. 26. Roads bordered with apple trees, and then roads with plum trees, were lapped up by the front tires endlessly. The weather was fine, and toward night the steel cells of the radiator were crammed with dead bees. The dragonflies, the meadow browns. Rex drove wonderfully, reclining lazily on the very low seat, and manipulating the steering wheel with tender and almost dreamy touch. In the black window hung a plush monkey, gazing toward the north, from which they were speeding away. Then in France there were poplars along the roads. The maids in the hotels did not understand Margot, and this made her wild. It was proposed that they should spend the spring on the Riviera, and then push on to the Italian lakes. Shortly before reaching the coast, their last stopping place was at Rougenard. They arrived there at sunset. An orange-flushed cloud curled in wisps all across the pale green sky. Above the dark mountains, lights glowed in the squatting cafes. The plane trees on the boulevard were already shrouded in darkness. Margot was tired and irritable, as she always was toward night, since their departure, that is to say for almost 3 weeks, for they had not quite hurried, stopping at a number of picturesque little places with the same old church in the same square. She had not once been alone with Rex. When they drove into Rougenard, and Albinus was going into ecstasies over the outlines of the purpling hills, Margot muttered through her clenched teeth, "Oh, gush away, gush away." She was on the brink of tears. They drove up to a big hotel, and Albinus went to ask about rooms. "I shall go mad if this goes on much longer," said Margot, without looking at Rex. "Give him a sleeping draught," suggested Rex. "I'll get him one from the chemist." I've tried already, answered Margot, but it doesn't act. Albinus returned a little upset. No good, he said. It's very tiresome. I'm sorry, darling. They drove to 3 hotels in succession, and they were all full up. Margot flatly refused to go on to the next town, as she said that the curves of the road made her sick. She was in such a temper that Albinus was afraid to look at her. At last, in the 5th hotel, they were asked to enter the lift in order to go up and see the only 2 rooms available. An olive-skinned lift boy, who took them up, stood with his handsome profile toward them. Look at those eyelashes, said Rex, nudging Albinus gently. Stop that darn foolery, exclaimed Margot suddenly. The room with the double bed was not at all bad, but Margot kept tapping her heel gently on the floor and repeating in a low, sulky voice, I won't stay here, but really it is quite nice for one night, said Albinus entreatingly. The servant opened an inside door to the bathroom, went through and opened a second door, disclosing a second bedroom. Rex and Margot suddenly exchanged glances. I don't know if you'll mind sharing the bathroom with us, Rex, said Albinus. Margot is rather splashy and long about it. Good, laughed Rex. We'll manage somehow. Are you quite sure you haven't got another single room? Asked Albinus, turning to the servant, but here Margot hurriedly intervened. Nonsense, she said. It's all right. I refuse to traipse around any longer. She walked to the window while the baggage was being brought in. There was a big star in the plum-colored sky. The black tree-tops were perfectly still. Crickets chirped, but she saw and heard nothing. Albinus began to unpack in the toilet things. I'm going to have a bath first, she said, undressing hurriedly. Go ahead, he answered cheerily. I'll be shaving, but don't be too long. We must get some dinner. In the mirror, he saw Margot's jumper, skirt, and a couple of light undergarments, one stocking and then another, fly swiftly through the air. Little Saturn, he said thickly, as he lathered his chin. He heard the door shut, the bolts rattle, and the water pour in noisily. You needn't lock yourself in. I'm not going to turn you out, he called laughingly, as he stretched his cheek with his finger. There was a loud and steady rush of water behind the locked door. Albinus carefully scraped his cheek with a heavy plated Gillette. He wondered whether they had lobsters a l'américaine here. The water went on rushing, and grew louder and louder. He had turned the corner, so to speak, and was about to return to his Adam's apple, where a few little bristles were always reluctant to go, when suddenly he noticed with a shock that a stream of water was trickling from beneath the door in the bathroom. The roar of the taps had now taken on a triumphant note. Surely she can't be drowned, he muttered, running to the door and knocking. Darling, are you all right? You're flooding the room. No answer. Margot, Margot, he shouted, rattling the handle and quite unconscious of the queer part of the doors played in his and her life. Margot slipped back into the bedroom. It was full of steam and hot water. She swiftly turned off the taps. I want to sleep in the bath, she called out plaintively through the door. You're crazy, said Albinus. How you frightened me. The rivulets blackening the pale gray carpet weakened and stopped. Albinus walked back to the mirror and lathered his throat once more. In a few minutes, Margot emerged fresh and radiant and began to smother herself with talcum powder. Albinus, in his turn, went to have a bath. The place was reeking with moisture. He knocked at Rex's door. I won't keep you waiting, he cried. The bath will be free in a moment. Oh, take your time, shouted Rex happily. At supper, Margot was in splendid spirits. They sat on the terrace. A white moth fluttered round the lamp and fell down on the tablecloth. We'll stay here a long, long time, said Margot. I like this place tremendously. 27. A week passed and a second. The days were cloudless. There were lots of flowers and foreigners. An hour's drive took one to a beautiful sand beach set in the dark red rocks against the dark blue sky. Pine-clad hills surrounded their hotel, a fine building as such buildings go, in a sickening Moorish style that would have made Albinus's flesh creep had he not been so happy. Margot was happy too, so was Rex. She was much admired by a silk manufacturer from Lyons, by a quiet Englishman who collected beetles, by the youths who played tennis with her. But no matter who stared at her or danced with her, Albinus felt no jealousy. It quite surprised him to recall the pangs he had suffered at Sophie. Why had everything made him uneasy then, and why did he feel so sure of her at present? He did not notice one little thing, that she no longer had any wish to please others. She needed only one man, Rex, and Rex was Albinus's shadow. One day the 3 of them went for a long ramble in the mountains, got lost, and finally came down by a difficult stony path which took them the wrong way. Margot, who was not used to walking, blistered her foot badly, and the 2 men carried her by the turns, well-nigh crashing down with their burden, as neither was very robust. At about 2 in the afternoon they reached a sun-drenched little village, and found the Rougenard bus ready to start from a cobbly square where some men were playing bowls. Margot and Rex got inside. Albinus was about to do the same, but then observing that the driver had not yet seated himself and would be some time yet helping an old farmer to get to his large 2 crates in, he tapped on the half-open pane at which Margot was sitting and said he would make a dash for a drink. He made the dash and entered a small bar on the corner of the square. As he was reaching for his beer, he jostled against a delicate little man in white flannels, who was hurriedly paying. They looked at each other. "You here, Udo?" exclaimed Albinus. "This is an unexpected pleasure." "Very unexpected," said Udo Conrad. "You've grown a little balder, old man. Are you here with your family?" "Well, no. You see, I'm staying at Ruginard, and—" "Good," said Conrad. "I'm living in Ruginard, too. Heavens, this bus is starting. Hurry up." "I'm coming," said Albinus, and swilled down his beer. Conrad trotted toward the bus and boarded it. The horn tooted. Albinus fumbled with elusive French coins. "Oh, there's no hurry," said the bartender, a melancholy man with a black, drooping mustache. "I'll first go round the village, and then stop again at this corner before going on." "Oh, well," said Albinus, "then I'll have another drink." Through the bright doorway he saw the long yellow bus speed away through the speckled maze of plane tree shadow, which seemed to mingle with it and dissolve it. "Funny meeting Udo," Albinus mused. "He's grown a little blonde beard, as if to compensate for my loss of hair. When did we last see each other? 6 years ago. Am I thrilled to see him? Not at all. I thought he lived in San Remo. A quaint, pale, rather eerie, and not very happy man. Celibacy, hay fever, hates cats, and the ticking of clocks. A fine writer, a delightful writer. Funny that he hasn't the faintest idea what my life has changed. Funny my standing here in this hot, drowsy little place where I've never been before, and shall probably never come again. I wonder what Elizabeth is doing now. Black dress, idle hands, better not think of it. How long does the bus take to go round the village?" he asked in his slow, careful French. "A couple of minutes," said the bartender sadly. "Not quite clear what they do with those wooden balls. Wooden, or is it some other metal? First cupped in the palm, then launched forward, rolling, stopping, awkward as if he happens to get into conversation with the little girl on the way and she blurts it all before I tell him. Will she? I wonder. Not much chance of their talking, though. She was unhappy, poor child, and will sit quite still. It seems to be quite a big village, judging by the time it takes to go round," he remarked. "It doesn't go round," said an old man with a clay pipe who was sitting at a table behind him. "It does," said the gloomy bartender. "It did up to last Sunday," said the old man. "Now it goes straight on." "Well," said the bartender, "that's no fault of mine, is it?" "Well, what shall I do now?" cried Albinus in dismay. "Take the next one," said the old man judiciously. He got home at last and found Margot in a desk chair on the terrace, eating cherries with Rex sitting on the white parapet in bathing shorts, his long hairy brown back turned to the sun, a quite happy picture. "I missed the blessed thing," said Albinus, grinning. "You would," said Margot. "Tell me, did you notice a small man in white with a goldenish beard?" "I did," said Rex. Sat behind us. What about him?" "Nothing, just a man I used to know once." 28. The next morning, Albinus made a conscientious inquiries at the tourist office and then at a German boarding house, but no one could tell him Udo Conrad's address. "After all, we've nothing much to say to each other," he thought. "Probably I'll run into him again if we stay here any longer, and if I don't, it doesn't much matter." A few days later he woke up earlier than usual, threw open the shutters, smiled at the tender blue sky and at the soft green slopes, luminous yet hazy, as if it were all a bright frontispiece under tissue paper, and he felt a strong longing to climb and wander, and to breathe the time-scented air. Margot awoke. "It's still so early," she said drowsily. He suggested that they should dress quickly and go out for the whole day, just the two of them. "Go by yourself," she murmured, turning over to the other side. "Oh, you lazy bones," said Albinus sadly. It was about 8. At a good pace he got out of the narrow streets, cut longitudinally in two by the morning shade and sunshine, and began the ascent. As he was passing a tiny villa, painted a warm pink, he heard the click of shears and saw Udo Conrad pruning something in the small rocky garden. Yes, he had always had a green thumb. "Got you at last," said Albinus gaily, and the other turned but did not smile back. "Oh," he said dryly, "I didn't expect to see you again." Solitude had developed him a spinster's touchiness, and now he was deriving a morbid pleasure from feeling hurt. "Don't be silly, Udo," said Albinus as he approached, gently pushing aside the feathery foliage of a mimosa tree which leaned wistfully in his way. "You know quite well I didn't miss it on purpose. I thought it would go around the village and come back again." Conrad softened a little. "Never mind," he said. "It often happens like that. One meets a man after a long interval and suddenly feels a panicky desire to give him the slip. I took it that you didn't enjoy the prospect of having to chatter about old times in the moving prison of a bus, and you avoided it neatly." Albinus laughed. "The truth is I've been hunting you for these last days. Nobody seemed to know your exact whereabouts. Yes, I only rented this cottage a few days ago. And where are you staying?" "Oh, at the Britannia." Really, I'm terribly glad to see you, Udo. You must tell me about yourself. Shall we go for a little walk?" suggested Conrad dubiously. "All right, I'll put on some other shoes." He was back in a minute, and they started to climb up a cool shady road, winding between vine-clad stone walls and its blue asphalt still untouched by the hot morning sun. "And how's your family?" asked Conrad. Albinus hesitated and then said, "Better not ask, Udo. Some terrible things have been happening to me lately. Last year we'd separated, Elizabeth and I, and then my little Irma died from pneumonia. I prefer not to talk on these matters, if you don't mind." "How very distressing," said Conrad. They both fell silent. Albinus pondered whether it might not be rather glamorous and exciting to talk about his passionate love affair to his old pal of his, who had always known him to be a shy, unadventurous fellow, but he put it off till later. Conrad, on the other hand, was reflecting that he had made a mistake in going for that walk. He preferred people to be carefree and happy when they shared his company. "I didn't know you were in France," said Albinus. "I thought you usually dwelt in Mussolini's country." "Who is Mussolini?" asked Conrad with a puzzled frown. "Ah, you're always the same," laughed Albinus. "Don't get into a panic. I'm not going to talk politics. Tell me about your work, please. Your last novel is superb." "I'm afraid," said Udo, "that our fatherland is not quite at the right level to appreciate my writings. I'm gladly write in French, but I'm loath to part with the experience and riches amassed in the course of my handling of our language." "Come, come," said Albinus. "There are lots of people who love your books. Not as I love them," said Conrad. "It'll be a long time, a solid century perhaps, till I am appreciated at my worth. That is, if the art of writing and reading is not quite forgotten by then I am afraid that it is being rather thoroughly forgotten this last half-century in Germany." "How's that?" said Albinus. "Well, when a literature subsists almost exclusively on lives and lives, it means it is dying. And I don't think much of Freudian novels or novels about the quiet countryside. You may argue that it is not literature in the mass that matters, but the 2 of 3 real writers who stand aloof, unnoticed by their grave, pompous contemporaries. All the same, it is rather trying sometimes. It makes me wild to see the books that are being taken seriously." "No," said Albinus, "I'm not at all of your mind. If our age is interested in social problems, there's no reason why authors or talents should not try to help. The war, post-war unrest—" "Don't," moaned Conrad gently. They were silent again. The winding road had taken them to a pine grove where the creaking of cicadas was like the endless winding up and whir of some clockwork toy. A stream was running over flat stones which seemed to quiver under the knots of the water. They sat down on the dry, sweet-smelling turf. "But don't you rather feel an outcast always living abroad?" asked Albinus, as he gazed up at the pine tops that looked like seaweeds swimming in blue water. "Don't you long for the sound of German voices?" "Oh, well, I do run into compatriots now and then, and it is sometimes quite amusing. I've noticed, for instance, that German tourists are inclined to think that not a soul can understand their language." "I could not always live abroad," said Albinus, lying on his back and dreamily following with his eye the outlines of blue gulfs and lagoons and creeks between green branches. "That day we met," said Conrad, also reclining with his arms under his head, "I had a rather fascinating experience with those 2 friends of yours in the bus. You do know them, don't you?" "Yes, slightly," replied Albinus with a little laugh. "So I thought, judging from their merriment at your being left behind." "Wicked little girl," said Albinus tenderly. "Shall I tell them about her?" "No." "I had quite a good time listening to their conversation, but I did not feel exactly homesick. It is a queer thing. The more I think of it, the more I feel certain that there comes a time in an artist's life when he stops needing his fatherland. Like those creatures, you know, who first live in an aquatic state and then only on dry land." "There would be something in me yearning for the coolness of water," said Albinus with a sort of heavyish whimsicality. "By the way, I found a rather nice bit at the beginning of Baum's new book, Discovery of Taprobana. A Chinese traveler, it appears, ages ago, journeyed across Gobi to India and stood one day by a great jade image of Buddha in a shrine on a hill in Ceylon, and saw a merchant offering a native Chinese present, a white silk fan, and, interrupted Conrad, a sudden weariness in his long exile seized upon the traveler. I know that sort of thing, although I haven't read that dreary fool's last effort and never will. Anyway, the merchants I see here aren't particularly good at provoking nostalgia." They were both silent again. Both felt very bored. After contemplating for a few minutes more the pines in the sky, Conrad sat up and said, "You know, old boy, I'm awfully sorry, but would you mind very much if we went back? I've got some writing to get done before midday." "Right you are," said Albinus, rising in his turn. "I must be getting home too." They descended to the path in silence, and then shook hands at Conrad's door, with a great show of cordiality. "Well, that's over," thought Albinus, much relieved. "Catch me calling on him again." 29. On his way home, as he was entering a Bardabax to get some cigarettes and pushing aside with the back of his hand the streaming, tinkling bead and reed curtain, he collided with the retired French colonel, who for the last 2 or 3 days had been their dining-room neighbor. Albinus stepped back into the narrow side of the sidewalk. "Pardon," said the colonel, a hearty fellow. "5 morning what?" "Very fine," agreed Albinus. "And where are the lovers today?" inquired the colonel. "What do you mean?" asked Albinus. "Well, people who cuddle in corners. Qui se peloton dans tous les coins are usually called so, aren't they?" said the colonel, with what the French call a Gugenard look in his porcelain bloodshot eye. "I only wish," he added, "they wouldn't do it in the garden so immediately under my window. It makes an old man envious." "What do you mean?" repeated Albinus. "I don't feel equal to saying it all over again in German," laughed the colonel. "Good morning, my dear sir." He walked away. Albinus entered the shop. "What nonsense!" he exclaimed, staring hard at the woman who sat on a stool behind the counter. "Comment, monsieur?" she asked. "What perfect nonsense!" he repeated as he stopped at the corner and stood there, with knitted brows, in the way of passers-by. He had the obscure sensation of everything's being suddenly turned the other way around, so that he had to read it all backward if he wanted to understand. It was a sensation devoid of any pain or astonishment. It was simply something dark and looming, and yet smooth and soundless, coming toward him. And there he stood in a kind of dreamy, helpless stupor, not even trying to avoid that ghostly impact, as if it were some curious phenomenon which could do him no harm so long as the stupor lasted. "Impossible," he said suddenly, and a queer twisted thought occurred to him. He followed its weird bat-like shudder and flight, as if again it were a thing to study, not to be frightened of. Then he turned round, almost knocking down a little girl in a black pinafore, and hastily went back the way he had just come. Conrad, who had been writing in the garden, went to his study on the ground floor of a notebook he needed, and was in the act of looking for it on his desk by the window when he saw Albinus's face peering at him from outside. "Bother the man," he thought swiftly. "Isn't he going to give me any peace now, popping out from nowhere?" "Look here, Udo," said Albinus in a strange blurred kind of voice. "I forgot to ask you something. What did they talk about in the bus?" "Pardon?" said Conrad. "What did those 2 talk about in the bus? You said it was a fascinating experience." What?" asked Conrad. "Oh, yes. Now I see. Well, it was fascinating in a way. Yes, quite right. I wanted to give you that example of how Germans behave when they think no one else can understand. Is that what you mean?" Albinus nodded. "Well," said Conrad, "it was the cheapest, loudest, nastiest, amorous prattle that I've ever heard in my life. Those friends of yours talked freely of their love as though they were alone in paradise, a rather gross paradise, I'm afraid." "Udo," said Albinus, "can you swear to what you're saying?" "Pardon?" "Are you perfectly sure of what you're saying?" "Why, yes. What's the idea? Wait a bit. I'm coming into the garden. I can't hear a word through this window." He found his notebook and went out. "Hello, where are you?" he cried, but Albinus had disappeared. Conrad walked out into the lane. No, the man was gone. "I wonder," muttered Conrad, "I wonder whether I haven't committed some blunder. Nasty rhyme, that. What's it, I wonder? Ah la la la, blunder, horrible." 30. Albinus descended into the town, crossed the boulevard without quickening his steady pace, and reached his hotel. He went up and into his room, their room. It was empty, the bed was not made, some coffee had been spilled, and a little spoon was gleaming on the white rug. With bent head he gazed at that shiny spot. At that moment Margot's shrill laugh sounded from the garden below. He leaned out of the window. She was walking by the side of a youth in white shorts, and the racket which she brandished as she chattered glistened like gold in the sun. Her partner caught sight of Albinus at the third-floor window. Margot looked up and stopped. Albinus moved his arm as if grabbing something to his breast. It was supposed to mean come up, so Margot understood it. She nodded and lazily came down the gravel walk toward the oleander shrubs which flanked the entrance. He walked back from the window, squatted down and unlocked his suitcase, but then remembered that he was looking for was in another place. He walked over to the wardrobe and thrust his hand into the pocket of his yellow camel's hair overcoat. He rapidly examined the thing he had got out to see if it was loaded. Then he posted himself at the door. As soon as she opened it, he would shoot her down. He did not bother to ask her any questions. It was all plain as death, and with a kind of hideous smoothness fitted into the logical scheme of things. They had been deceiving him steadily, astutely, artistically. She must be killed at once. As he waited for her at the door, his mind went out to track her. Now she would have entered the hotel. Now she would be coming up in the lift. He listened for the click of her heels along the corridor, but his imagination had outstripped her. Everything was silent. He must begin afresh. He held the automatic pistol, and it seemed like a natural extension of his hand, which was tense and eager to discharge itself. There was almost a sensual pleasure in the thought of pressing back that incurved trigger. He almost fired at the white closed door when he heard the light patter of her rubber soles. Yes, of course, she was wearing tennis shoes. There were no heels to click, no, but at that moment he heard other steps. "Will Madame permit me to fetch the tray?" asked a French voice outside the door. Margot came in at the same time as the chambermaid. Unconsciously, he slipped the pistol into his pocket. "What do you want?" demanded Margot. "You might have to come down, you know, instead of calling me up so rudely." He made no reply, but he watched with bowed head while the chambermaid placed the crockery on the tray and picked up the little spoon. She lifted the tray, beamed, went out, and now the door closed. "Albert, whatever has happened?" He lowered his hand into his pocket. Margot, with a shiver of pain, dropped down on a chair by the bed, bent her sunburned neck and began to untie quickly the laces of her white shoe. He looked at her glossy black head, at the bluish shade on her neck where her hair had been shaved. Impossible to fire while she was taking off her shoe. She had a sore place just above her heel and blood had soaked through her white sock. "It's absurd how badly I rub it every time," she said, lifting her head. She saw the black gun in his hand. "Don't play with that thing, you fool," she said very calmly. "Stand up," whispered Albinus, and clutched her wrist. "I won't stand up," answered Margot, pulling the sock off with her free hand. "Let me go. Look, it's got stuck to the sock." He shook her so violently that the chair rattled. She gripped the edge of the bedstead and began to laugh. "Please, shoot me. Do," she said. "It will be just like that play we saw, with the pillow, and I'm just as innocent as she was." "You lie," whispered Albinus. "You and that scoundrel. Nothing but trickery and deceit, and—" His upper lip trembled. He struggled with a stammer. "Please put that thing down. I won't speak to you until you have. I don't know what's happened, and I don't want to. I only know one thing. I am faithful to you. I am faithful." "All right," said Albinus hoarsely. "You can say what you have to say, but after what you shall die. You need not kill me. Really, you needn't, darling. Go on, speak." "If I were to rush to the door," she thought, "I might just manage to run out. Then I'd scream and people would come running up. Then everything would be spoiled. Everything. I can't speak as long as you're holding that thing. Please put it away. Or perhaps I could knock it out of his hand?" "No," said Albinus. "First of all, you must confess. I've got information. I know all. I know all," he repeated in a broken voice, walking up and down the room and striking the furniture with the edge of his palm. "I know all. He sat behind you in that bus, and you behaved like lovers. Oh, of course I shall shoot you." "Yes, I thought as much," said Margot. "I knew that you wouldn't understand. For God's sake, put that thing down, Albert." "What is there to understand?" screamed Albinus. "What is there to be explained? In the first place, Albert, you know very well that he doesn't care for women." "Shut up," screamed Albinus. "That was a base lie, a rascally trick from the beginning. If he yells, the danger is over," thought Margot. "No, he really doesn't care for women," she went on, "but once, for a joke, I suggested to him, 'Look here, let's see whether I can't make you forget about your boys.' Oh, we both knew it was only a joke. That was all, darling. A dirty lie. I don't believe it. Conrad saw you. That French colonel saw you, only I was blind." "Oh, but I often teased him that way," said Margot coolly. "It's all very funny, but I won't any more if it upsets you. So you deceived me only for a joke? How filthy! Of course I didn't deceive you. How dare you say such a thing? He wouldn't have been capable of helping me to deceive you. We didn't even kiss. Even that would have been repulsive to both of us. And if I questioned him, not in your presence, of course, not in your presence, do by all means. He'll tell you exactly the same, only if you make yourself rather ridiculous." They went on talking in this way for an hour. Margot was gradually getting the upper hand, but at length she could stand it no longer and had a fit of hysterics. She threw herself onto the bed in her white tennis frock, with one foot bare, and as she gradually calmed down, she wept into the pillows. Albinus sat in a chair by the window. Outside the sun was shining, and gay English voices floated across from the tennis ground. Mentally, he reviewed every least episode from the beginning of their acquaintanceship with Rex, and among them, some were touched by that livid light which had now spread over his whole existence. Something was destroyed forever. No matter how convincingly Margot tried to prove that she had been faithful to him, everything would henceforth be tainted with a poisonous flavor of doubt. At length he rose to his feet, walked across to the bed, gazed at her pink wrinkled heel with a bit of blackened plaster on it, but she had managed to stick it on, gazed at the golden brown skin of her slim but firm calf, and reflected that he could kill her, but that he might not part from her. "Very well, Margot," he said gloomily. "I believe you, but you must get up immediately and change your clothes. We're going to pack your things at once and leave this place. I'm not physically equal to meeting him now, and I can't answer for myself, not because I believe that you have deceived me with him. No, not on that account, but I simply can't do it. I pictured it all to myself too vividly, and, well, no matter. Come, get up." "Kiss me," said Margot softly. "No, not now. I want to get away from here as soon as possible. I almost shot you in this room, and I shall certainly shoot you if we don't pack our things at once. At once." "As you like," said Margot, "but please remember that you've insulted me and my love for you in the worst manner possible. I suppose you'll understand that later." Swiftly and silently, without looking at each other, they packed. Then the porter came for the luggage. Rex was playing poker with a couple of Americans in Russian in the terrace, in the shade of a giant eucalyptus. Luck was against him that morning. He was just contemplating doing a little palming at his next shuffle, or perhaps using in a certain private manner the mirror inside his cigarette case lid, little tricks that he disliked and used only when playing with tyros, when suddenly, beyond the magnolias in the road near the garage, he saw Albanus's car. The car swerved awkwardly and disappeared. "What's up?" murmured Rex. "Who's driving that car?" He paid his debts and went to look for Margot. She was not on the tennis ground. She was not in the garden. He went upstairs. Albanus's door was ajar. The room was dead, the open wardrobe empty. Empty, too, was the glass shelf above the washstand. A torn and crumpled newspaper lay on the floor. Rex pulled at his underlip and passed into his own room. He thought rather vaguely that he might find a note there with some explanation. There was nothing, of course. He clicked his tongue and went out and down into the hall to find out whether at least they had paid for his room. There are a great many people who, without possessing any expert knowledge, are yet able to readjust an electrical connection after a mysterious occurrence known as a short circuit, or with the aid of a penknife to set a watch going again, or even, if necessary, to fry a cutlet. Albanus was not one of them. He could not tie a dress tie, nor pare his right-hand nails, nor make up a parcel. He could not uncork a bottle without picking to bits one half of the cork and drowning the other. As a child he never knew built things like other boys. As a youth he had never taken his bicycle to pieces, nor indeed could do anything with it save ride it. And when he punctured a tire, he pushed the disabled machine, squelching like an old galosh, to the nearest repair shop. Later, when he studied the restoration of pictures, he always was afraid to touch the canvas himself. During the war, he had distinguished himself by an amazing incapacity to do anything whatever with his hands. In view of all this, it is less surprising that he was a very bad driver, and that he could drive at all. Slowly and with difficulty, and with a complicated argument, the gist of which he failed to catch with a policeman at the crossroads, he got his car out of Rougenard, and then accelerated a little. "Do you mind telling me where we are going, if you don't mind?" asked Margot tartly. He shrugged his shoulders and stared straight ahead, along the shiny blue-black road. Now that they were out of Rougenard, with the narrow streets that had been full of people and traffic, and where he used to sound his horn, pull up with a jerk and turn clumsily, now that they were bowling smoothly along the highway, various thoughts drifted darkly and confusedly through his brain. That the road climbed up and up into the mountains, that it would soon begin to wind dangerously, that Rex's button had once gotten tangled in Margot's lace, and that his heart had never been so heavy and distraught as now. "It's all one to me where we go," said Margot, "but I'd just like to know, and please do keep to the right. If you can't drive, we had better take a train or hire a chauffeur at the nearest garage." He put on the brake violently because a motor coach had appeared in the distance. "What are we doing, Albert? Keep to the right. That's all you've got to do." The motor coach, filled with the tourists, thundered past. Albanus started off again. The road began to curve around the mountain. "Does it matter where we go?" he thought. "Wherever we go, I shall not escape this pain. The cheapest, loudest, nastiest, I shall go mad." "I won't ask you again," said Margot, "but for God's sake don't wobble before the bends. It is ridiculous. What are you trying to do? If you knew how my head aches, I shall be thankful when we get somewhere." "You swear to me there was nothing in it?" asked Albanus in a faint voice, and he felt hot tears dimming his vision. He blinked, and the roads reappeared. "I swear," said Margot. "I'm tired of swearing to you. Kill me, but don't torture me any longer. By the way, I'm too hot. I think I'll take off my coat." He put on the brake. Margot laughed. "What need is there to stop for that? Oh dear, oh dear." He helped her out of her dust coat, and as he did so, he recalled with extraordinary vividness how, long, long ago, he noticed for the first time, in a wretched little cafe, the way she moved her shoulders and bent her lovely neck, while she wriggled out of the sleeves. Now the tears streamed down his cheeks uncontrollably. Margot put her arms around him and pressed her temple to his bent head. Their car was standing so close to the parapet, a stout stone wall a foot high, behind which a ravine, overgrown with brambles, sloped steeply down. Far below could be heard the swish and rumble of a rapid stream. On the left-hand side rode a reddish rocky slope with pine trees on its summit. The sun was scorching. A little way ahead, a man with black spectacles was sitting on the edge of the road breaking stones. "I love you so much," groaned Albinus, "so much." He fondled her hands and stroked her convulsively. She laughed softly, a satisfied laugh. "Let me drive now," begged Margot. "You know I can do it better than you." "No, I'm improving," he said, smiling, gulping, blowing his nose. "It's curious, but I really don't know where we are going. I think I've sent the luggage on to San Remo, but I'm not quite sure." He started the engine and they drove on. It seemed to him that the car now traveled more easily and obediently, and he no longer clutched the steering wheel so nervously. The bends became more frequent. On one side soared the steep cliff, on the other was the ravine. The sun stabbed his eyes, the pointer in the speedometer trembled and rose. A sharp bend was approaching, and Albinus proposed to take it with special dexterity. High above the road, an old woman who was gathering herbs saw to the right of the cliff this little blue car speed toward the bend, behind the corner of which, dashing from the opposite side toward an unknown meeting, two cyclists crouched over their handlebars. 32. The old woman gathering herbs on the hillside saw the car and the two cyclists approaching the sharp bend from opposite directions. From a mail plane flying coastward through the sparkling blue dust of the sky, the pilot could see the loops of the road, the shadow of his wings, gliding across the sunlit slopes in two villages 12 miles distant from one another, perhaps by rising still higher. It would be possible to see simultaneously the mountains of Provence and a distant town in another country, let us say Berlin, where the weather was hot too, for on this particular day the cheek of the earth from Gibraltar to Stockholm was painted with mellow sunshine. In Berlin, on this particular day, a great many ices were sold. Irma at once used to look on with the gravity of greed when the ice cream man smeared a thin wafer with thick yellowish substance, which when tasted made one's tongue dance and one's front teeth ache deliciously, so that when Elizabeth stepped onto the balcony and noticed one of these ice cream bidders, it seemed strange to her that he should be dressed all in white and she in all in black. She had awakened feeling very restless, and now she realized with a strange dismay that for the first time she had emerged from that state of dull torpor to which she had grown accustomed of late, and she could not understand why she felt so strangely uncomfortable. She lingered on the balcony and thought of the day before, on which nothing special had happened. The usual drive to the churchyard, bees settling on her flowers, the damp glitter of the box hedge around the grave, the stillness in the soft earth. What can it be, she wondered? Why am I all a tingle? From the balcony she could see the ice cream bin over this white cap. The balcony seemed to soar higher, higher. The sun threw a dazzling light on the titles. In Berlin, in Brussels, in Paris, and farther toward the south, the mail plane was flying to St. Cassian. The old woman was gathering herbs on the rocky slope. For a whole year at least she would be telling people how she had seen what she had seen. 33. Albinus was not clear when and how he came to know these things, the time from his blithely taking the bend until now, a couple of weeks to the place where he was, a clinic at Gras, an operation which he had undergone, trepanning, and the reason for his long period of unconsciousness, effusion of blood into the brain. A moment had arrived, however, when all these bits of information had been gathered into one. He was alive and fully conscious, and knew that Margot and a hospital nurse were close at hand. He felt that he had been dozing pleasantly, and that he had just awakened. But what time it was he did not know. Probably it was still early in the morning. His forehead and his eyes were covered with a soft, thick bandage, but his skull was already uncovered, and it was strange to feel with his fingers the bristles of new hair on his head. In his memory he retained a picture that was, in its gaudy intensity, like a colored photograph on the glass. The curve of the glossy blue road, the green and red cliff to the left, the white parapet to the right in front of him, the approaching cyclists, two dusty apes in orange-colored jerseys, a sharp jerk of the steering wheel to avoid them, and up the car dashed, mounting a pile of stones to the right. In the next fraction of that second, a telegraph post loomed in front of the windscreen. Margot's outstretched arm had flown across the picture, and the next moment the magic lantern went out. This recollection had been completed by Margot. Yesterday, or the day before yesterday, or even earlier, she had told him, or rather her voice. Why only her voice? Why was it so long since he had really seen her? This bandage, probably they would soon take it off. What had Margot's voice told him? If it had not been for the telegraph post, we should have plunged over the parapet and into the precipice. It was appalling. I've still a huge bruise on my hip. The car turned a somersault and smashed like an egg. It caused Bucombe marks. This was meant, apparently, for the nurse. Albert, what's the French for 20,000? Oh, what does it matter? You are alive. The cyclists were very nice. They helped to gather up all the things, but they couldn't find the tennis rackets. Tennis rackets? Sun on a tennis racket. Why was that so unpleasant? Oh yes, that nightmare business at Rougenard. He with his gun in his hand, she coming in on rubber soles. Nonsense, all that had been cleared up. Everything was all right. What time was it? When would that bandage be taken off? When could he get up? Had it got to the papers, the German papers? He turned his head this way and that. The bandage worried him, also the discrepancy between his senses. His ears had been absorbing so many impressions all this time, and his eyes none at all. He did not know what the room or the nurse or the doctor looked like, and the time, was it morning? He had had a long, sweet sleep. Probably the window was open, for he heard the clatter of horse hoofs outside. There was also the sound of running water, and the clanging note of a pail. Perhaps there was a courtyard with a wall, and the cool morning shade of plane trees. He lay for some time motionless, endeavoring to transform the incoherent sound into corresponding shapes and colors. It was the opposite of trying to imagine, the kind of voices which Botticelli's angels had. Presently he heard Margot's laugh, and then that the hospital nurse. Apparently they were sitting in the next room. She was teaching Margot to pronounce correctly in French, "S'occupe," and Margot repeated several times, and they both laughed softly. Feeling that he was doing something absolutely forbidden, Albinus cautiously drew up the bandage and peeped out, but the room still remained quite dark. He could not even see the bluish glimmer of a window or those faint patches of light which come to stay with the walls at night. So it was night after all, not morning, not even early morning, a black moonless night. How deceptive sounds can be! Or were their blinds especially thick? From the next room came a pleasant rattle of crockery. Café aimé toujours, the nicked toujours. Albinus fumbled over the bedside table until he felt a little electric lamp. He pressed the switch once, a second time, but the darkness remained there, as if it were too heavy to move. Probably the plug had been taken out. He felt with his fingers for matches, and he actually found a box. There was only one match inside. He struck it, heard a sizzle slightly as though he had lit it, but he could not see any flame. He threw it away and suddenly smelt a faint odor of sulphur. Strange! "Margot!" he shouted suddenly. "Margot!" A sound of rapid footsteps and a door opening, but nothing changed. How could it be dark behind the door, if they were having coffee there? "Turn on the light," he said angrily. "Please turn on that light." "You are a bad boy," said Margot's voice. He heard her approaching swiftly and surely through the absolute night. "You ought not touch that bandage." "What do you mean? You seem to see me," he stammered. "How can you see me? Turn on the light. Do you hear at once?" "Calmez-vous. Don't excite yourself," said the voice of the nurse. These sounds, these footsteps and voices seemed to be moving on a different plane. He was here and they were somewhere else, but still in some uncountable way close at hand. Between them and the night which enveloped him was an impenetrable wall. He rubbed his eyelids, turned his head this way and that, jerked himself about, but it was impossible to force a way through its solid darkness, which was like a part of himself. "It can't be," said Albinus with an emphasis of despair. "I'm going mad. Open the window. Do something. The window is open," she answered softly. "Perhaps there is no sun. Margot, perhaps I might see something in the very sunny weather. The merest glimmer, perhaps with glasses. Lie still, my dear. The sun is shining. It is a glorious morning, Albert. You hurt me. Albinus drew a deep breath which seemed to make his chest swell into some vast, monstrous globe, full of a whirling roar which presently he let out lustily, steadily, and when it had all gone he started filling up again. 34. His cuts and bruises healed, his hair grew again, but the terrible sense of his solid black wall remained unchanged. After those paroxysms of deadly horror, when he had howled, flung himself about and tried frantically to tear something away from his eyes, he lapsed into a state of semi-consciousness. Then presently there would loom once more that unbearable mountain of oppression which was only comparable with the panic of one who wakes to find himself in his grave. Gradually, however, these fits became less frequent. For hours on end he lay on his back, silent and motionless, listening to daytime sounds which seemed to have turned their backs upon him in merry converse with others. Suddenly he would recall that morning in Rougenard, which had really been the beginning of it all, and then he groaned anew. He visualized the sky, blue distances, light and shade, pink houses, dotting a bright green slope, lovely dream landscapes at which he gazed so little. While he was still at the hospital, Margot had read aloud to him a letter from Rex, which ran as follows: "I don't know, my dear Albinus, what staggered me most, the wrong you did me by your inexplicable and very uncivil departure, or the misfortune which has befallen you, but although you have wounded me deeply, I sympathize with you wholeheartedly your misfortune, especially when I think of your love for painting and for those beauties of color and line which make sight the prince of all our senses. I am traveling today from Paris to England, and thence to New York, and it will be some time before I see Germany again. Please convey my friendly greetings to your companion, whose fickle and spoiled nature was presumably the case of your disloyalty toward me. Alas, she is only constant in relation to herself, but like so many women, she has a craving to be admired by others, which turns to spite with the man in question by reason of his plain-spokenness His repulsive exterior and unnatural inclinations cannot but excite her ridicule and aversion. Believe me, Albinus, I liked you well, more than I ever showed, but if you had told me in plain terms that my presence had become irksome to you both, I should have prized your frankness highly, and then the happy recollections of our talks about painting, our rambles in the world of color, would not have been so sadly darkened by the shadow of your faithless flight. Yes, that is the letter of a homosexual, said Albinus, but all the same I am glad he is gone. Perhaps, Margot, God has punished me for distrusting you, but woe betide if you— If what, Albert? Go on, finish your sentence. No, nothing, I believe you. Oh, I believe you. He was silent, but then began to make that smothered sound, half moan, half bellow, which was always the beginning of his paroxysms of horror at the darkness surrounding him. The prince of all our senses, he repeated several times in a faltering voice. Ah, yes, the prince. When he had calmed down, Margot said that she was going out to the travel agency. She kissed his cheek and then tripped swiftly along the shady side of the street. She entered a cool little restaurant and seated herself next to Rex. He was drinking white wine. Well, he asked, what did the poor old beggar say to the letter? Did I word it cutely? Yes, it went down all right. On Wednesday we are leaving for Zurich to see that specialist. Please see about the tickets, but please take yours in a different carriage. It's safer. I'm doubtful, remarked Rex carelessly, whether they'll let me have the tickets for nothing. Margot smiled tenderly and began taking out notes from her handbag. And as general thing, added Rex, it would be much simpler if I were the cashier. Although Albinus had several times in the depths of the night which employed the bright small talk of daylight, been for a while a pitiful, hesitating walk along the scrunching gravel paths of the hospital garden, he proved to be very ill prepared for the journey to Zurich. At the railway station his head began to swim, and there is no stranger more helpless sensation than that of a blind man when his head is going round. He was stunned by all the different sounds, footsteps, voices, wheels, vicious, sharp, and strong things, which all seemed to be rushing at him, so that every second was filled with the fear of knocking against something, although Margot was guiding him. In the train he felt his gorge rise with nausea, because he could not harmonize the clatter and rocking of the carriage with any forward motion, no matter how hard he tried to imagine the landscape which surely was speeding past. And then, again, at Zurich, he had to make his way among invisible people and objects, obstacles and angles, which held their breath before hitting him. Oh, come on, don't be afraid, said Margot irritably. I'm leading you. Now stop, we are just going to get into the taxi. Now lift your foot. Could you be a little less timid? Really, you might be a 2-year-old. The professor, a famous oculist, made a thorough examination of Albinus's eyes. He had a soft, unctuous voice, so that Albinus pictured him as an old man with a clean-shaven, priest-like face, although in reality he was still fairly young and sported a bristly mustache. He repeated what Albinus for the most part already knew, that the optic nerves had been damaged at the point of their intersection in the brain. Possibly this contusion might heal, possibly complete atrophy might ensue. The chances were obscurely even. In any case, the patient's present condition, although thorough rest was the most important thing, a sanatorium in the mountains would be perfect, and then we shall see, said the professor. Shall we see? Repeated Albinus with a melancholy smile. The idea of a sanatorium did not appeal to Margot. An old Irish couple whom they met in the hotel offered to let them a small chalet just above a fashionable mountain resort. She consulted Rex, and then, leaving Albinus with a hired nurse, traveled in his company to see what the place was like. It turned out to be quite nice, a small 2-storied cottage, with clean little rooms and a cup for holy water affixed to every door. Rex found his possession to his liking, all alone, high upon a slope, amid dense black fir trees, and only a quarter of an hour's downhill walk to the village and to the hotels. He chose for himself the sunniest room in the upper story. A cook was engaged in the village. Rex talked to her very impressively. We are offering you such high wages, he said, because you'll be in the service of a man who is blinded as a result of a violent mental shock. I'm the doctor in charge of him, but in view of his state of mind we must not know that the doctor is living in the house with him, as well as his niece, and therefore you breathe the slightest hint, direct or indirect, as to my presence, addressing me, for instance, in his hearing, you'll be responsible in the eyes of the law for all the consequences of interrupting the progress of his recovery, and such conduct is, I believe, very severely punished in Switzerland. Moreover, I advise you not to come near my patient, or indeed to engage in any sort of conversation with him. He is subject to fits of the most violent insanity. You may be interested to know that he has already seriously injured one old woman. much like you in many respects, though not so attractive by stamping on her face. Somehow, I should not care for such a thing to happen again, and most important of all, if you gossip about things in the village with the result that people become curious, my patient might, in his present condition, smash up everything in the house, beginning with your head. Do you get me?" The woman was so terrified that she almost refused this extraordinarily well-paid post, and made up her mind to accept it only when Rex assured her that she would not see the blind man, his niece serving him, and that he was quite peaceable if left undisturbed. He also made arrangements with her that no butcher's boy or washerwoman should ever be allowed to penetrate the grounds. This done, Margot traveled back to fetch Albinus, while Rex moved into the house. He brought with him all the luggage, decided how the rooms were to be allotted, and arranged that every superfluous breakable object should be removed. Then he went to his room and whistled tunefully that he fastened some rather improper pen and ink drawings to the wall. Toward 5 o'clock he looked through a pair of field glasses and saw far below a hired motor car approaching. Margot, in a brilliant red jumper, skipped out and helped Albinus to alight. With hunched shoulders and dark spectacles, he looked like an owl. The car turned round and disappeared behind a thickly wooded bend. Margot took the meek, clumsy man by the arm, and he climbed the footpath, holding his stick in front of him. They vanished behind some fir trees, reappeared, vanished again, and at length emerged upon the little garden terrace, where the gloomy cook, who incidentally was already wholeheartedly devoted to Rex, went timorously to meet them, and trying not to look at the dangerous lunatic, relieved Margot of her attaché case. Rex, meanwhile, leaned out of the window and made droll gestures of greeting to Margot. He pressed his hand to his heart and flung out his arms jerkily. It was a capital imitation of Punch. All of this, of course, in dumb show, though he could have squeaked remarkably in more favorable circumstances. Margot smiled up at him and entered the house, still leading Albinus by the arm. "Take me through all the rooms and describe everything to me," said Albinus. He was not really interested, but he thought that it would give Margot pleasure. She loved settling in a new place. "A little dining room, a little drawing room, a little study," she explained, as she steered him through the ground floor. Albinus touched the furniture, patted the different objects as if they were threads of strange children, and tried to get his bearings. "So the window is over there," he said, pointing thrustfully at a blank wall. He collided painfully with the edge of a table and tried to pretend that he had done it on purpose, groping over it with his hands, and though he wanted to take its measure. Then he climbed side by side up the creaking wooden staircase. Above, on the top step, sat Rex, convulsed with soundless mirth. Margot shook her finger at him. He stood up cautiously and stepped back on the tips of his toes. This was really superfluous, for the staircase creaked deafeningly under the blind man's tread. They turned into the passage. Rex, who had now retreated to his door, crouched down several times and pressed his hand to his mouth. Margot shook her head angrily. A dangerous game. He was larking about like a schoolboy. "This is my bedroom, and here's yours," she said. "Why not one?" asked Albinus wistfully. "Oh, Albert," she sighed, "you know that the doctor said." When they had been everywhere except into Rex's room, of course, Albinus tried to go through the house without her help, just to show how splendidly she had made him to see it all. But almost at once he lost his way, ran into the wall, smiled apologetically, and nearly smashed a wash basin. He also strayed into the corner room, which Rex had appropriated, and which could only be entered from the passage, but he was already so confused that he thought he was coming out of the bathroom. "Careful, that's a lumber room," said Margot. "You're going to break your head. Now turn around and try to walk straight to bed. And really, I don't know whether all this roaring is good for you. Don't imagine that I shall let you go on exploring like this. Today is just an exception." As it was, he already felt utterly exhausted. Margot tucked him in and brought him his supper. When he had gone to sleep, she joined Rex. As they were not yet on speaking terms with the acoustics of the house, they talked in whispers, but they could just as well have spoken aloud. Albinus's bedroom was far away.